Alright guys, I'm going to do CVX here. Just going to do a quick setup on the INT 732. Hopefully it might help you guys out. They're having some issues getting the probes, or at least seeing how I have mine set up anyway. Set it up how you want, but of course always nice to have a starting point to work from there. So anyway, kids broke my camcorder, so I'm using my digital camera. Sorry for the shitty quality, and I'll try and do this as quickly as possible. So you'll see I have the original INT unit. Since then they've taken the feedback, they've installed the digital light here. They've probably changed this mesh to something other so it doesn't bow up and actually raise up the PCB support. I've got the new nozzles in. They just came in last week, all 4 sizes. And of course I just have 2 clip-on lights to compensate. A little push switch in the back. Worked pretty good. So, also real quick, a lot of questions on the outlets. Here's when I ran up from the basement off of a 20 amp breaker. Here's the plug. Nothing to it. I think it's $7, local hardware store. Make sure you run the right gauge wiring. I use 20 gauge. Make sure you get the wires matched up right when you put it inside. It's been working perfect. So anyway, what I've got here is I've got 8 consoles in this week, a couple PS3s, half a dozen Xboxes. This one here I'm going to reflow now is out of an Elite 2008. Does have the epoxy on the chip. I typically don't ever take that off. I only remove it, of course, if it's going to be reballed and or if the first reflow didn't take, and I'm pretty certain it's the GPU chip. Otherwise I just usually leave them on. On the PCB fixture itself, I have it set up. Once I got it locked in, these never move. I've got them locked in, same with the side to keep it from traveling this way. I put 3 screws on the first rail, 3 on the second, and only 1 on the third. I do use these just to latch onto the board at the end, but I don't push them in tight. Probe B for the bottom preheater. You'll notice I run mine underneath here. Helps keep it out of the way when I put the board down. And I have it so it's bent up. So when I lay the board down in, I know it's making solid contact with the board. Probe A, of course, comes off the back. And probe C is off to the side. I'll use that for the other side of the GPU chip. So first things first, I'm going to try and do this one-handed with my camera here. I'm going to take the board, slide it back, look for the screws. Usually a lot easier if you have 2 hands. Just slide them up screw holes and drops right down on. Simple as that. Then I slide it back so that it's into the groove on the 2 holders in the back. Once it's touching there, I slide the first one in. Usually always touch around the number 4 on the board. Again, I don't push them in hard, I just push them till they touch and spin the nut down. I'm not looking to put any stress on the board or flex it in any way. The next one I do, I push in, I hit mine about the number 7 on the board. Again, hold it up there in place, just turn it down. Now that the board's in place, I double check, make sure it's sitting flush everywhere, it's not hanging up on anything. You can usually slide these screws a little bit side to side to make sure it's not grabbing on the corners. And now the board's in. Notice I run the board from the front to the back. I do this because the preheater has got its greatest area from the front to the back of the machine. It's not as wide as it is in length, in total depth, if you will. And of course with motherboards you want to make sure that you got as much of the motherboard over the preheater as possible. That's why I don't run it this way. It doesn't, you'll be short about 1 inch or so on each side from where the actual preheater plate starts, which is inside this metal cage about right here. So anyway, once I get that board set up, I go ahead and get about centered over the preheater. I'll start to lower the probe. Turn my lights on here so I can see. And I lower the nozzle down. I do have the 4141 nozzle in. Just showed up last week. Before I only had, I think it was a 3636, so just keep lower. Once I get it a little bit above the board, then I start to line everything up on all 4 sides, make sure front and back is all clear. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. Another important thing, you want to make sure that your nozzle is as square as possible to the board on all 4 sides. If you have a bigger gap here than you do over here, you'll get uneven heating, especially if that's where you got your probes. I think a lot of people overlook that. So this one, I can usually grab it and pull it. whichever direction I need to square up my nozzle to the board, and it works perfect. But you do have to do that. So again, just realigning everything. Looks pretty good, so I'm going to lower it down, and you can see I leave it just a hair above. I don't know, crappy camera, but that's on the board, that's up. Again, there's all the way down. That's about all the farther I come up. Just enough, really, so I can get in there and see the solder balls. I know you can't from the video of this. So I can watch the solder balls, make sure they're melting. And then what I do is I set the probe A first in the back. I usually put it about 1/4 of an inch in from the corner. And you want to make sure the tension's pushing on it's up against the chip. You don't want it not touching it. So once I make sure it's touching, it is there. And you can see the bead, or the head of the probe, is completely under the nozzle. Then I'll come around, I'll take C from the front. Now C is a little bit trickier for me anyway on this one, to get it to stay right up against the chip. It always wants to seem to pull back. I've always got to find just the right bend in the cable to get her down. One thing I did start to do was these capacitors up front here. I've started to just kind of wedge it in between there. Once I get in a position, it seems to hold it okay. And it's not going to hurt the capacitors. So, little trick. I wedge the cable in there, and I make sure it's up against the chip. That way the thing won't spring back, especially as you're heating it up. If it's barely touching, and you start heating it up, and people are complaining that they're 10 to 20 degrees Celsius apart, well, that probe tip, if it's not up against the chip and it pulls away, it's going to read a lot different than what the one is touching the chip. The one touching the chip is going to be hotter. Of course, B, again, I have it routed underneath the rail and up underneath the bottom. Turn that light off. Up underneath the bottom, and I check to make sure it's touching underneath the CPU area, right in front of where the CPU chip is. Right there. And I know you can't hardly see that, but it's probably in about, a couple of inches. Let me remove this. It moved. I actually wish they would have put the probes in a different location in front of the machine so you don't bump into them. It makes it real easy to hit them, knock them out of place. And of course, we want these pretty precise, so. Alright. So again, C's back in place. I've got my nozzle where I want it. So I usually turn off my lights. That's just for aligning the nozzle. You'll want to turn the machine on. But I'm not sure, somebody was talking about the machine being really loud. I mean, it's the fan that's blowing in the top heater is what you're hearing. I personally don't think it's that loud myself, but I guess if you're in a room that's not well insulated or out in the open, it might seem a little worse. And then you want to hit the select button here. I didn't hit it quick enough here before I turned it on. So type O. I go to type 2, hit the select button, hit it again until it says run, simply hit up. It does a countdown. 3, 2, 1, and then it's going to start into the countdown. So again, just an overview here while this thing's doing its own thing. I've got A, turn the light on here. Got A in the back, near the back left corner. C near the opposite corner in the front, and of course B up underneath. And you can see how I have the motherboard position. USB tower up in the front. That's about it. No real magic to it at all. Try and get you some close-up shots in here. And one thing I typically do, of course, on this machine is you can hit just this top button to go back and forth between A and B or A and C as it goes up. I always used to leave it on A and B. A is the most important, I guess, the one that I always watch. This thing does run by the duration you have set in there anyway. Your A could be reading 200 degrees, and if you want it to get up to 220, if you only have it programmed in for 60 seconds in that cycle, it's going to move on to the next segment regardless what the temp hits. So it's not necessarily driven by the temp setting on your probe. But at the end of each segment, you do want to make sure your probes are getting almost exactly onto where you set them, especially when you get into segment 5 and go into segment 6 for the actual reflow. So this thing's slowly going up. My profile is, I think it's 8 minutes 40 seconds. I'll run it from start to finish. But again, just hoping to show everybody how and where I place my probes, and any little tricks I do to hold them in place so they don't move, will help somebody else out on the forum. Thanks. I guess one other bit, I know a lot of people are talking about differences in temp settings. I mean, right here you can see I'm within 2 degrees from A to C. It usually goes, now it's 1, then 2. I mean, it keeps jumping up and down. But on average, it's within, I'd say, 2 to 5. I mean, if it's jumped up to 7 every now and then, it usually comes right back down. So, not just sure the way the combination of the air and IR, but as you can see, they usually stay right in line. So, there's no issues with how it's set up in the machine. Some people are struggling trying to get those numbers to match, and I truly again believe it's just practice and reflowing lots of boards and understanding the position of the probes are up tight against the chips, the nozzle's square to the surface of the board, there's no gaps on either side. I don't know, I guess it's just a few little tweaks. So you can see it's staying within a few degrees here, and this will continue on pretty much throughout the process. Here we got up to 3 degrees spread, but again, it just hangs around in that 3 to 4 range most of the time. So just thought I'd do a quick show on that as well, to see that sometimes it does jump around 3, 4, 5 degrees or so, then it comes right back, but that's the worst I've ever seen it do here. So just thought I'd show that, since I know there's a lot of questions on that as well. Just another quick recording. Now I'm into segment 4 again. You can see the thermocouple still within 2 degrees apart from one another. So again, I can't explain what everybody else is seeing, but this thing stays pretty damn accurate all the way through. And again, this is in the segment 4 with the top heater climbing, so if you're going to see a spread, this is probably where you start to see it. You can see it keeping pace almost degree for degree. I mean, I can't be pleased enough with how accurate this thing has been. So I'll come back again and also show you under segment 5 and 6, so you can see it stays throughout the process. And here's segment 6, near the end of the reflow here. Again, notice there's only about a 2 to 3 degree spread, and now it just ended.